introduce myself. My name is Wendy Latimer. I work at Western University, which is in London, Ontario. I've been a learning specialist for the past 4 years, and before that, I was an academic counselor in the School of Health Studies. I've actually been working at Western for almost 20 years. This will be my 20th anniversary, and I love talking to students. And in my time, I've encountered a lot of students who come up against setbacks and mistakes, and so I'm hoping that today some of the insights that I have to present will help you as well. So I'm also a fairly informal presenter, and that means I'm more than happy to have you pop questions into the chat. I'll try to keep looking at that as often as I can. There's one opportunity to participate using a Padlet, and I'll be asking one time for people to share just general answers to questions in the chat. Aside from that, most of this presentation is fairly reflective. I know coming up against failure in your academics can sometimes be a really personal experience. Don't feel the need that you have to share anything personal. There'll be a reflection at the end, but we'll lead that kind of individually. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. And yeah, let's start with our perceptions of failure. So we definitely see a ton of information about failures of all sorts, not just academic, in media. And so I wanted to take just a moment, just kind of feel the pulse of the room. Just share with me on this Padlet, either use your phone or go to the link there. Um, and just share with me 2, 3 words, a picture, a GIF about how you feel about failure. And I'm going to stop share and head over there in just a second, but give yourself a minute. Throw something in there if you can. So it's right here, the Padlet activity. Either use your phone or pop that into your web browser. And I'm going to head over there. Okay. There are a few here already. And I think the main takeaway here, or the reason I started with this experience, was just because I really wanted people the opportunity to kind of think about our preconceived notions of what failure is. A lot of times we're disappointed, we're frustrated, we feel like we haven't, we sort of aren't enough when something comes up, when there's some sort of setback. So I've seen, and I did ask of a few of my colleagues to submit some ideas as well. I shared my own. I'm always very tearful. I'll mention that again in a few minutes about what happens to us physically when we feel like we fail. But I do see depression as something that someone has shared. I just feel, depressed. It's really hard. It could be lethargy. I don't feel like I've got a lot of energy after coming up against something, feeling not good enough. But there are some people too that are sharing, get back up, it's time to reflect, it's try again or change perspective. Thank you to those who've participated. Give me 1 second and I'll just hop back to the presentation. I hope everyone can see that now. So here are the things that we're going to talk about. This is a 30-minute session, so we'll spend the next 25 minutes together. I just really want to talk a little bit about the role of failure and setbacks in learning. And spoiler alert, it is normal. In fact, most of the time, the learning experience is supposed to push us out of our comfort zone, and we are supposed to make mistakes along the way. The next point I want to make is that sometimes you win and sometimes you learn, and that in fact, there is a cycle to learning that includes getting feedback. And a lot of times, that feedback is around that things didn't go very well. And finally, if you are someone who's come to the session today because you very recently experienced a setback, I've got a couple slides where we can talk about, how do we bounce back? So what do we do when we're in that feeling of failure? What do we do? How do we make a plan? So we've got a couple of slides on that. I wanted to start by leaning pretty heavily into the work of Amy Edmondson. And at the very, very end of this presentation, I did create a little sources and guides so that if you are interested in finding out more about her work, she works at the Harvard Business School and she researches and writes on failure, mostly in terms of the business experience, but there's definitely an academic context. I really like this table that she's created around destigmatizing failure. And I think a lot of the messages that we're sent about failure, especially when we look at it on social media, in movies, on TV shows, is that traditional frame. And what Amy Edmondson is asking us to do is to move thinking about failure from that traditional frame and into more of a learning frame. So you can see from this table a few different ways that they wish to do that. So when you look at the concept of failure, if you're looking at it from a learning frame, you're accepting that failure is a natural byproduct of experimenting and of taking risks. Although she's looking at things in a business context, I really do see that this applies to academics. And I work a lot with students who feel like it's important to prevent failure at all costs, when the goal should really be about learning and growing and making a mistake that actually promotes fast learning. So you can see that goal section of this table. The goal shouldn't actually be to prevent failure, but instead, we should look at the fact that we've come across a bump or a failure and see the ways in which we can learn from that. Oh, I see just a note in the the chat, and yes, I did share a copy of all of the slides. They'll be in the resources and bouncing back from academic setbacks when you go back into the lobby. So yes, happy to share the slides. Okay, let's move on. So what I'm trying to say when I'm talking about normalizing failure as a part of academic setbacks is really that in challenging times and in times of transition, learning, innovation, whenever change is present, failure is more likely. And of course, when you think about that very logically, it makes a lot of sense. If you're pushing hard or trying something new, it's likely that you don't have all of the information in order to do it perfectly the first time. I posit that there's actually no way to avoid failures in learning. I encourage students, when I'm working with them as a learning strategist, to make mistakes on those practice exams, because actually you'll remember a lot better how to do a problem that you've made an error on first. And anytime we are learning something, we need to be open to struggling or failing. Okay, we need to be comfortable with that in order to really promote learning. And of course, there's people in this room who are experiencing all sorts of different approaches and disciplines, and you see mistakes kind of framed in different ways in different disciplinary approaches. So I think of science, I think of like the hypothesis, trial and error, the scientific method. all make room for making mistakes. In business, a lot of times there's a lot of talk about how to take risks and get comfortable with failure so that you can bounce back. And then, of course, in the creative arts, I took a trip this weekend to the Art Gallery of Ontario to take a look at some really brave and interesting risks that people took in their art that have brought them a lot of success. Okay, just one more slide on the work of Edmondson. I think this is a really important way to examine the failures that we make, especially when it comes to our academics. So Edmondson created a failure continuum, and I think it's really important to use something like this when I talk a little bit later in the presentation about error analysis. So this is the idea that there is a praiseworthy failure and more blameworthy failure. And so when you are reflecting back on a failure that has happened in your life, you could start to try and analyze that failure and put it on this continuum. Edmondson actually posits that there is an intelligent failure. And then there are failures that you would work harder to avoid. And an intelligent failure, she would say, is closer to the praiseworthy end of her continuum. So it's an opportunity that brings value and brings new knowledge, whereas something on the more blameworthy failure side is something that maybe you could have controlled. So if we take just a quick look here on the blameworthy, the red side of this continuum, we see things like deviance, inattention, and inability. So these are things like not following the instructions the first time, or actively choosing to, it says here, violate prescribed processes. You maybe knew the instructions, but you decided not to go in that direction, and then the results weren't what you expected. So those we take some ownership of. And then she says that something like praiseworthy failure, so where we come up with an idea that we just aren't sure if it's going to work, but we make, in that uncertainty, reasonable choices that lead to failure, not because of anything we did, but something that we couldn't see coming down the road. Or we're testing out something because we want to know more. These would be considered an intelligent or praiseworthy failure. And so when we think about the stuff that we're doing academically, if if we get back a test with a grade that isn't as strong, is it because we creatively tried something new that just didn't work? Is it something we were pushing? Are we at the precipice of learning something new and moving forward? Or is it more of a blameworthy failure where we see, we didn't pay attention or we didn't get started early enough? It's really helpful to kind of take a look at these things and examine the way that we fail. So I really like to use this continuum when I'm talking to students. The last thing I want to say around environment is that there do need to be a few things that are present to make it easier for us to encounter a failure in a way where we bounce back. So it's a lot easier for us to accept failure if these things are present. So let's think a little bit about our own environment and whether or not we have psychological safety. And what we mean by that is, I feel like I can fail without there being too many repercussions. We need to have leaders or mentors or TAs or professors who model moving through academic setbacks and failures. So maybe they understand that mistakes happen. And I love the idea of them modeling curiosity for you. So it means that they want to explore failures and why things aren't working the way that you expected them to, rather than to kind of admonish them or assume that all failures are blameworthy. And then finally, you need to have an environment that really focuses on the learning and not focuses on execution issues. Okay. And if you're really interested in that, I've done some reading and some work on with the research of Carol Dweck, which is growth mindset, and I've added a link to one of her videos at the end of the slides. Okay, so these are the things we need to be present. So let's think a little bit about our environment and whether or not we're in a really good spot in order to feel like we can bounce back. Any questions or any comments, please do feel free to put them in the chat. In the meantime, I wanted to move on to that cycle that I talked about at the very beginning, because how we learn from failure really is cyclical. And so we need to consider failure as just one step on a learning cycle. So let's start with number one right here. I'm hoping you can see that. Our openness and our willing to try something new. So perhaps we're trying a new study technique for an exam that's coming up. Perhaps we've decided to get really creative with our proposal for our research or something like that. We need to be open and willing to try something new and maybe take a risk. We move on to step number two, which is the act of trying it. So you're actually doing the act. You've built something. Maybe you've built a robot, maybe you've written an essay, and you're putting it out there for number three. That's where you get the feedback. That's where you get the information that tells you how your act went. That's often where we find out whether or not things have worked and whether or not we're dealing with a setback, a mistake, a failure. Of course, when we get that feedback, we do need to take time in number four to feel our feelings, because we're normal and we have normal human reactions to this. And then to engage in some reflection on where you might want to go next. That's number four. And then finally, number five is when you're taking the action. Again, you're using that feedback to plan a way forward, and you're getting open to trying again. Okay, so it is a cycle. And I really want to show you that failure is number three on a cycle that continues. So it's not necessarily the ending point. In fact, it almost never is an ending point, especially when it comes to our learning. Okay. And so the one thing I really want to honor is the way that we react to failure. So earlier on the Padlet, I shared a little GIF of the of sadness from the Inside Out movie. The way that her tears just kind of fall out in a very like animated way really gets to me, because my first reaction is an emotional one. Tears will stream down my face. I wanted to give you a second to, in the chat, if you would, just share one way in which you react when you learn that you've made a mistake. So there could be a cognitive or intellectual reaction. So that's about how we might think of ourselves or how we might talk to ourselves. There's that emotional reaction, which is how we feel. And then there are physical reactions. So I said tears. Some people flush or blush. Some people feel tired or withdrawn. Please share things that you've maybe experienced in the past when you've bumped up against an academic mistake, failure, setback. The actual physical feeling sick. Melanie, thank you. I know that pit of your stomach feeling. Anxiousness as well. I'm glad that you shared anxiousness, because I think of the ways in which sometimes we ruminate on failure. We can't sleep. Because we're thinking about it, we don't feel hungry. Shame, like I've disappointed a prof or a mentor. Thanks, Becca, for that. Shame is so related to this, and I've left a link at the end on some work by Brené Brown around shame. Withdrawal from the subject. This is something I see a lot in my work with students. They don't want to address or take a look at what they've done. So sometimes I'll have a student sit in my office and say, I think I did really terrible on that exam 3 weeks ago, but I haven't checked my mark. I don't even feel like I can check my mark, or I haven't been able to get to that class since I've since I experienced a setback a few weeks ago. Oh, and I'm not the only crier here. And I'm so glad. With high stakes, it just rolls down our cheeks. There's a joke that I have within my family and even some of my coworkers, so you know how frequently this happens, that crying is part of my process. It's the first step in getting me to do stuff. It's actually maybe my procrastination trigger. If I can get the tears out, then maybe I can move on. Thank you so much for sharing those. And I really want to make sure that I'm honoring that there is time to kind of experience those things. Okay, so what do we do once we've gotten, some feedback? How do we bounce back from those failures or mistakes? And, the last slide really hits home that like we are gonna feel things when we receive feedback that we weren't expecting or that feels like a setback. So the very first piece is dealing with those emotions and practicing self-care. So we do need to take a moment. um, my idea here is that you're going to give yourself a bit of time and space. I don't want any of that withdrawing for too long that we talked about in the last slide, but it's often the advice you'll hear from people is to give it 24 to 48 hours, especially if it's something where you want to talk to a professor or a TA about, issues you had with the grade that you received. Giving yourself time and space, especially if you're feeling angry or disappointed. You want to make sure that you have full control over how you're writing that email or making that inquiry. It's important to avoid self-criticism. There's a part of this, I'm going to talk about error analysis. That's a time when you can be more constructive. But in the end time, during that dealing with emotions stage, it really should be avoiding that feeling of criticizing yourself. And so then I'm moving into number 2, which is perspective taking. And I know it seems a bit trite, but I have done this exercise with students before. Will this matter to you in 5 hours? Will this matter to you in 5 years? Where do you place this failure in terms of importance? I often ask, if a friend came to you and shared this failure story, what would you say to them? And can you then give yourself the same grace? Because we are much harder on ourselves than we are around the other people that we love. The third thing we should be doing is we should be seeking out social support. So sharing our experience with a trusted friend. We need to find someone we can talk about who is safe. And it's really important in this step to tell those people what you need. I always have these conversations with my daughter and my husband where they're sharing something that happened to them during the day. And sometimes I'm really want to jump in and do some fixing. And so I need to pull back and I ask them, are you here to tell me about this because you would like me just to listen? Or are you here to tell me this so that I can offer you some help and solutions? So if you're going for social support, it's always nice to say, hi, can you just listen to me and not tell me what you would do in this situation? The other great thing about social support and being able to talk to someone about it is that we're going to be doing that work at a very ground level of sort of destigmatizing failure. What else should we do? We should also engage in error analysis when we feel ready. What I mean by that is we've got to go back to it. We need to do a deeper dive into the feedback. Hopefully some of the feedback is constructive. We need to maybe review the test or reread that essay or figure out ways in which, the prototype didn't work out, go back to the hypothesis and see if there's any other way that we can figure out what happened. It's great to use the failure continuum that I had up just a few slides ago. Was this something where I might need to build a new habit? Was this something that was beyond my control? And then key questions to ask yourself there is, not just why didn't this plan work, but what adjustments could I make, or what could I do if I need to start over? That leads into number 5, which is to create a plan, a strategy that's very specific on actions. I'm sure many of you know about SMART goals, but that's something that you would want to work on. And then finally, I want to encourage growth mindset. You need to be able to believe that you can improve. You need to be able to tell yourself that the steps that you're implementing in step 5 when you create a plan will take you through your next try. And so, just to conclude, there were sort of 3 really important points that I wanted to make, and I hope that you've gotten something to take away from this presentation. So, I really want to encourage people to normalize failure in learning. It's really important. And we do need to recognize that the whole community needs to be safe for mistakes in order for us to experience them just as more of an opportunity to learn than something that where, things have to stop. And if we accept that mistakes are going to happen to us all, it's also really helpful to consider them as part of that cycle that I talked about. So it was step 3 of a 5-step cycle. It means it's not the end. It's really just the middle of the journey. There are some strategies you can use that we talked about a little bit here. And finally, there are supports that are available if we need help managing. And so I just wanted to leave you with a quick 2-minute exercise, and we do have time for it. I was gonna try to make a handout, but I think it would be nice to have it more informal. You can open up notes in your phone, grab a Post-it note or a cue card, and this is like an in case of emergency contacts card, but this is an in case of a mistake. In case of a mistake, who is one person I feel safe to talk to about an academic failure with? What is one resource you can access for help? That may take you a couple seconds to take a look at your institution and see if they have learning specialists, learning strategists, wellness counselors. And then what is one thing, one self-care strategy that you're going to do when you manage those feelings associated with failure? Are you going to give yourself 24 hours? Are you going to take a walk? Do you feel better when you've gone to the gym to exercise? Or could you set a clock that says I received this feedback and I'm not going to look at it for 2 hours while I process this? Think about those 3 things and just jot them down somewhere so that you know in times when those emotions might be feeling a little overwhelming that there's something that you can do. Okay? All right. I have really enjoyed researching and putting this quick 30-minute presentation together. I do have it also as a longer hour-long version, which is a workshop where we process a little bit as a group. I just wanted to, just a second here, I'll take you to the end. Another quick tour through these slides. I just wanted to put up a few resources that might be of interest to you as you think about this topic down the road. If there are other learning strategists in the room, hidden curriculum is super useful and interesting around activities you can do for all sorts of executive functioning, learning strategies, and wellness strategies. I pulled a lot of work today from Amy Edmondson, Brene Brown, and Carol Dweck. And I also had really interesting and exciting conversations with Victoria Fritz, who's a learning specialist at the University of Guelph, and Erin House, who's a psychotherapist and a learning specialist out in the community. And I've got her website there. So thank you again for coming. I'm happy to hang around for a few minutes if you have questions in the chat or want to come off mute, but I really enjoyed my time. Thank you to the PAW organizers for putting all of this on. Oh, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the sessions that are coming through. Yeah, the keynote looks really interesting. I'm going to keep answering a couple of questions in the chat, but thank you again and enjoy your day. Hidden curriculum is awesome. It's a open source website that was developed with some faculty members here at Western, and they've got a side for educators, which has some really cool activities that educators can include on learning skills. But there is a portal for students specifically called Learners that gives you some ideas on how to incorporate new practices into your studying and just general life. So yeah, thanks for the great question. If there are no other questions, I'm gonna hop off here, but I really enjoyed presenting and I'm really grateful for all the participation and questions. Take care.